She cared for an abandoned patient without knowing he was the millionaire owner of the hospital. Destiny has strange ways of bringing people together. Sometimes, when we least expect it, when life has hit us so hard that we think we can't take anymore, someone appears who will change everything forever. This is the story of a nurse who cared for an abandoned patient, never imagining that this apparently homeless man had the power to transform her life and the lives of thousands of people. It's 5:30 a.m. at St. Mary's Hospital. The fluorescent lights flicker weakly in the empty corridors, as Grace Thompson drags her tired feet toward the elevator. At 28 years old, she already has the look of someone who has carried the world on her shoulders. Her white uniform is perfectly pressed, but the dark circles under her eyes betray the barely 3 hours of sleep she managed to get last night. Grace isn't just any nurse. While her colleagues work one shift and go home to rest, she chains together double shifts, sometimes triple, because every dollar she earns has a sacred destination: medication for her sister Emma, who at 21 is fighting lupus, a disease that devours savings as quickly as it devours hope. Thompson, the harsh voice of Supervisor Margaret Collins, cuts through the morning air like a knife. Margaret is one of those people who enjoys exercising power over those she considers inferior. For her, nurses like Grace, who come from humble neighborhoods, are barely a step above servants. "Good morning, Supervisor Collins." Grace responds with a courtesy she has perfected over years of humiliation. "You're assigned to the minimal care ward. There's a new patient in room 237. Car accident. No identification, no family. Probably another vagrant who got into trouble," Margaret says with the disdain she reserves for those who can't afford private rooms. "Don't waste resources on him. We have patients who actually matter." If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We have many more stories that will move you just as much as this one. Grace nods without comment. She has learned that contradicting Margaret only brings problems. As she walks toward the minimal care ward, she thinks about Emma, who this morning had to cancel another medical appointment because insurance doesn't cover the new treatment she needs. Each day that passes without the proper medication, the disease advances a little more. Room 237 is at the end of the hallway, far from the nursing stations, as if they wanted to hide its occupants from the rest of the world. Grace gently pushes the door and enters. In the bed lies a man who appears to be about 35 years old. He has bandages on his head, his left arm in a cast, and multiple contusions that speak of a severe accident. But there's something about him that catches Grace's attention. Despite his vulnerable state, his features have a natural elegance, as if he were accustomed to better circumstances. "Good morning," Grace whispers, approaching with the care she reserves for all her patients, regardless of their social condition. "I'm Grace, your nurse. How are you feeling?" The man slowly opens his eyes. They are a deep brown color, intelligent and surprisingly alert for someone who is supposedly confused. For an instant, Grace feels those eyes studying her with an intensity that disconcerts her. What Grace doesn't know is that she's looking at Alexander Sterling, the multi-millionaire owner of St. Mary's Hospital and the entire Sterling Health Clinic chain. Alexander had been investigating undercover complaints about medical negligence in his own institutions when he suffered the accident. "I don't remember much," Alexander lies with a hoarse voice. In reality, he remembers every detail perfectly, including the dismissive comments he heard from the medical staff when they brought him in. They talked about him as if he were human garbage, and something inside him rebels against the idea of revealing his identity immediately. He wants to see how his hospital really functions when no one knows who he is. "Do you remember your name?" Grace asks with a tenderness that Alexander hasn't heard in years. "I can't. Everything is blurry," he continues lying, but fascinated by watching how this woman adjusts his pillows with expert and delicate hands, as if he were the most important person in the world. "Don't worry," Grace says, and there's something in her voice that conveys genuine security. "I'm going to make sure you receive the best possible care." Alexander is surprised by the absolute sincerity in those words. In his world of multi-million-dollar business, he's accustomed to people being kind to him because of his money and power. But this woman, who clearly sees him as an abandoned patient without resources, shows him kindness that seeks nothing in return. The following days become a revelation for Alexander. Grace appears every morning with a smile that illuminates the gray room. Despite working shifts that challenge human endurance, she brings him breakfast, helps him with his medications, and always finds time to sit beside him and ask how he feels. But Alexander also observes things that fill him with horror. He sees how other patients in the minimal care ward receive deficient medical attention, medications that arrive late or don't arrive at all, cold and insufficient meals, and staff that seems to consider these patients a nuisance to be tolerated. However, Grace is a ray of light in that somber place. Not only does she care for Alexander with extraordinary dedication, but she also worries about Mr. Harold, an elderly diabetic whose family can't visit him, and Sarah, a young woman with a fractured leg, who cries because she doesn't have money for the surgery she needs. "Why do you do this?" Alexander asks her one afternoon, while Grace helps him sit up to take his medication. "Do what?" she responds, genuinely confused by the question. "Care for us as if we were your family. I can see that you work more hours than any other nurse, but you don't seem to receive recognition for it." Grace sits in the chair next to his bed, and for a moment, lets fatigue reflect on her face. "My sister Emma always tells me I have a heart too big for my own good," she says with a sad smile. "But I believe everyone deserves care and respect, no matter how much money they have in their wallet." "Tell me about your sister," Alexander asks, and the way he says it reveals genuine interest that goes beyond courtesy. Grace's eyes immediately light up. "Emma is incredible. She's 21 and the smartest person I know. She was studying English literature at college until she got sick. She has lupus, and the treatments are expensive." Alexander notices how Grace's voice breaks slightly when mentioning the cost of treatments. "Is that why you work so much?" he asks gently. "Yes," Grace admits, looking down. "I work double shifts here, and weekends at a private clinic. Sometimes I also do night shifts at a private practice. But every sacrifice is worth it if I can see Emma smile one more day." Alexander feels a stab in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. Here is a woman who sacrifices her own health and well-being for pure love, while he has spent most of his adult life accumulating wealth he doesn't even need. "It must be very difficult," he comments, and there's vulnerability in his voice that surprises both of them. "It is," Grace admits, "but when I see patients like you, who are alone and need care, I remember why I chose to be a nurse. It's not just a job for me, it's a calling." That night, Alexander makes a decision that will change everything. He discreetly calls his personal assistant James Mitchell from the hospital phone. "Mr. Sterling, thank God you're okay. We've been looking for you for weeks," James exclaims with evident relief. "Listen, James. I need you to discreetly investigate a nurse named Grace Thompson. I want to know everything about her situation, especially about her sick sister, but do it without anyone knowing. The information comes from me." "Are you thinking of revealing your identity, sir?" "Not yet. But I want to help her. And James, I also want you to document everything you can about irregularities in this hospital. I have the feeling that what I've seen here is just the tip of the iceberg." Meanwhile, Grace arrives home past midnight, exhausted but with a full heart. There's something special about that nameless patient in room 237. Not just his way of speaking, which sometimes reveals refined education, but the way he looks at her, as if he really sees her, not just as a nurse, but as a valuable person. Have you ever met someone who changed your perspective on life, without you realizing it at the moment? Tell us in the comments. The next day, Grace arrives at the hospital earlier than usual. Emma had a crisis during the night, and although she managed to stabilize her, the emergency medical expenses have completely depleted her savings. She has 2 more jobs this weekend, but still doesn't know how she's going to get the money for Emma's next treatment. When she enters room 237, she finds Alexander awake, looking out the window with a thoughtful expression. "Good morning," she says, trying to hide her concern behind her professional smile. "Good morning, Grace." he responds, then studies her with those perceptive eyes. Are you okay? You look worried. Grace is surprised by his ability to read her emotions. I'm fine, just a long night. Was it your sister? Alexander asks with a gentleness that makes Grace's defenses waver. Yes, she admits, feeling tears she can't afford to shed. Emma had a crisis last night. She's stable now, but she needs a new treatment that costs. She stops, realizing she's sharing too much with a patient. How much? Alexander asks directly. I shouldn't be talking about this with you, Grace says, shaking her head. You're the one who needs care, not me. Grace, Alexander says, gently taking her hand. The contact sends an electric current through both of them. In these days you've been caring for me. You've become much more than my nurse. You're my friend, and I care about you. Grace feels something move in her chest, a warmth she hasn't experienced in a long time. Thank you, she whispers. That means more than you can imagine. Days pass, and the connection between Grace and Alexander deepens. He tells her invented stories about a simple life, while she shares her dreams of someday opening a free community clinic in her neighborhood. Alexander listens to every word, as if it were gold, and without Grace knowing, he's taking mental notes of everything. But reality catches up with them brutally. Dr. Patricia Morgan, head of internal medicine, and one of the people Alexander has been observing for possible corruption, begins to suspect that something doesn't add up with the patient in room 237. That man speaks like someone educated, she comments to Margaret Collins. And I've noticed he asks very specific questions about hospital operations. Margaret, always paranoid about her position, decides to investigate. But before she can do much, the conflict explodes in a way no one expected. It's a Tuesday morning when Margaret bursts into room 237, like a storm. Thompson, she shouts, making both Grace and Alexander startle. What do these flowers on the table mean? And this extra pillow? Who authorized these luxuries for a vagrant? Grace blushes. The flowers are wildflowers she brought from her small garden, thinking they would brighten the gray room. The extra pillow she took from her own home, because she noticed Alexander had trouble sleeping. I brought them, supervisor. I thought they would help his recovery. This is a hospital, not a luxury hotel. Margaret shouts. You're wasting resources on someone who probably can't even pay for his stay. And don't tell me you haven't been behaving inappropriately with this vagrant. Alexander feels something explode inside him. For weeks he has observed how Margaret humiliates Grace and other nurses, how she treats poor patients as if they were less than human. He can't tolerate it anymore. Supervisor Collins, Alexander says, and his voice carries an authority that makes both Margaret and Grace look at him with surprise. The flowers and extra pillow significantly help my recovery, and Nurse Thompson has provided exceptional care that exceeds any professional standard I've experienced. Margaret looks at him with a mixture of confusion and irritation. There's something in the way this vagrant speaks to her that deeply disconcerts her. Who do you think you are to speak to me like that? Margaret spits. Someone who has been very carefully observing how this hospital functions. Alexander responds, his eyes shining with dangerous intensity. At that precise moment, James Mitchell appears in the doorway, dressed in an expensive suit, and carrying a leather briefcase. Mr. Sterling, he says without thinking, but stops when he sees the two women. Excuse me, I didn't know you had visitors. The silence that follows is deafening. Grace feels the world stop around her. Mr. Sterling, she repeats slowly, as if the words were in a foreign language. Alexander closes his eyes, knowing the moment he had been postponing has finally arrived. There's no turning back. Grace, he says softly, I can explain everything. Who are you really? She asks, and for the first time since she's known him, there's coldness in her voice. James, realizing the situation, intervenes with the professional tact he has developed over years of working for powerful men. Miss Thompson, allow me to formally introduce Alexander Sterling, owner of St. Mary's Hospital, and president of Sterling Health Corporation. Grace's face goes through a complete range of emotions: shock, confusion, pain, and finally, a betrayal so deep it makes Alexander feel nauseous. You're the owner of the hospital," she whispers. "Grace, please, let me explain. All this time you've been lying." Her voice breaks. "Have I been part of some kind of cruel experiment?" "No," Alexander exclaims, trying to sit up despite the pain. "At first, yes. I wanted to observe how the hospital functioned. But after meeting you, everything changed." Margaret, meanwhile, has gone from confusion to absolute terror. She realizes she has been humiliating the hospital owner for weeks. "Mr. Sterling," she stammers. "If I had known who you were." "Exactly," Alexander says coldly, without taking his eyes off Grace. "If you had known who I was, you would have treated me differently. That's precisely the problem." But Grace is no longer listening. "You made me believe you were a man without resources, abandoned by his family. I shared my most intimate concerns with you, my financial problems. Did you enjoy watching how the poor nurse worried about the multimillionaire? It was never like that," Alexander shouts, but Grace is already heading toward the door. "I don't want to see you anymore," she says without turning around. "I'll request a transfer to another sector." "Grace, please, listen to me." But she's already gone, leaving Alexander with a feeling of emptiness that all his money can't fill. The following days are hell for both of them. Grace, keeping her promise, requests an immediate transfer, and another nurse, Linda Hayes, takes over Alexander's care. Linda is efficient but cold, and every interaction reminds Alexander how special his connection with Grace had been. Meanwhile, Alexander decides it's time to make the changes he had been planning. He calls an emergency meeting with all the hospital's medical and administrative staff. The news that the mysterious patient in room 237. Suddenly, everyone wants to visit him and apologize for any lack of attention. "Mr. Sterling," Margaret pleads, now wearing her best suit and perfect makeup, "if I had known your identity, I would have completely personalized your care." "That's exactly the problem, Margaret," Alexander responds with a coldness that makes her tremble. "The fact that you change your treatment based on who I am tells you everything I need to know about this place." During the meeting, Alexander announces a series of radical changes that leave everyone speechless. Significant salary increases for nurses, state-of-the-art equipment for the minimal care ward, a new free medical care program for low-income patients, and an exhaustive investigation of all medical practices from the past 2 years. "And effective immediately," he adds, his voice cutting through the air like a razor. "Anyone who has acted in an ethically questionable manner will be fired without mercy." The room fills with nervous murmurs. Alexander searches for Grace with his eyes, but she's not present. After the meeting, Alexander looks for Grace throughout the hospital. He finally finds her in the cafeteria, sitting alone during her break, eating a sandwich she clearly brought from home. "May I sit?" he asks. "It's your hospital," she responds without looking up. "You can do whatever you want." Alexander sits across from her, noticing the more pronounced dark circles on her face and the tension in her shoulders. "Grace, I need you to listen to me. Please." "What for?" "So you can tell me more lies." "To tell you the truth. The whole truth." Reluctantly, Grace looks up, and Alexander sees the pain he has caused reflected in those eyes that once looked at him with such warmth. "At first, yes, it was an investigation," Alexander begins. "I had received complaints about medical negligence and corruption in my hospitals. I wanted to see with my own eyes what was happening. But Grace, I swear by everything I consider sacred, that after meeting you, my motives changed completely." "How can I believe you?" she asks, and there are tears in her eyes. "How do I know I'm not simply another experiment for you? If this story is touching your heart like it's touching ours, don't forget to give it a like, and stay until the end, because what's coming will surprise you." Alexander takes out a small notebook filled with handwritten notes from his pocket. "Do you see this? During all the weeks I was in that room, I documented every irregularity I observed. expired medications given to poor patients, bribes between doctors, systematic discrimination. But I also documented something else. He opens the notebook and shows it to Grace. The pages are filled not only with observations about hospital problems, but with details about her dreams of opening a community clinic, her concerns about Emma, the small kindnesses she did for other patients, even her favorite foods and the books she liked to read. "Why did you write all this about me?" Grace asks, her voice barely a whisper. "Because for the first time in my life, someone cared for me without knowing who I really was. You talked to me about your dreams, shared your concerns, treated me as if I mattered, not because of my money, but because I was human. Grace, I fell in love with you." Grace closes the notebook abruptly. "How can you talk about love when our entire relationship was based on a lie?" "You're right," Alexander admits. "I lied about my identity, but everything I felt for you, every conversation we had, every moment we shared, that was real. More real than anything I've ever experienced in my life." Grace gets up from the table. "I need time to process all this." "How much time?" Alexander asks, desperate. "I don't know," she responds, and walks away, leaving Alexander heartbroken. The following weeks are a whirlwind of changes at St. Mary's Hospital. Alexander implements all the reforms he promised, firing Margaret Collins and Dr. Patricia Morgan, among others. He hires Rebecca Martinez, a nursing supervisor with an impeccable reputation, and transforms the minimal care ward into a model of quality medical care. But for Alexander, all these achievements feel empty without Grace. He has tried to talk to her several times, but she systematically avoids him. What he doesn't know is that Grace is also suffering, struggling between her pain over the betrayal and the feelings she developed for him. The crisis comes when Emma suffers a severe relapse that requires immediate hospitalization. The experimental treatment she needs costs a fortune that Grace simply doesn't have. Desperate, she works triple shifts, but knows it won't be enough. It's Rebecca Martinez who, knowing Grace's situation, approaches Alexander. "Mr. Sterling," she says in his office, "there's something you should know about Grace Thompson. Is she okay?" Alexander asks immediately, getting up from his desk. "Her sister is very sick. She needs a treatment that costs more than Grace can earn in a year. She's considering selling her house, but even then it wouldn't be enough." Alexander doesn't think twice. Arrange everything necessary for Grace's sister to receive the best available treatment, at the best private hospital in the city. And don't charge a penny. What if Grace finds out it comes from you? Make it look like it's part of the hospital's new medical assistance program. She can't know it comes from me. But Grace is smarter than Alexander calculated. When she receives notification that Emma qualifies for the medical assistance program, she investigates and discovers the program was created just days after Emma's relapse. She doesn't need to be a detective to connect the dots. Furious, she shows up at Alexander's office without an appointment. "How dare you?" she shouts, bursting in without knocking. "How dare you use my sister to try to buy my forgiveness?" Alexander, who was in a video conference, quickly dismisses his interlocutors. "Grace, it's not what you think." "Oh, it's not? So you didn't magically create a medical assistance program just when my sister needed it?" "I did," Alexander admits, "but not to buy you. I did it because I couldn't bear the idea of you suffering more than you already have, because of my fault." "I don't want your charity," Grace says, but Alexander can see the tears she's trying to hold back. "It's not charity," he responds, slowly approaching. "It's the right thing to do, and believe me, Grace, I've learned the difference. I can't accept it, even if it means Emma could die." The question hits Grace like a punch. She collapses into a chair, finally allowing tears to flow. "Why do you have to make this so difficult?" Alexander kneels in front of her. "Because I love you, Grace, and I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but your sister isn't to blame for my mistakes. If I accept this, what do you want in return?" she asks, her voice broken. "Nothing," Alexander responds immediately. "I want nothing in return. I just want you to have the chance to save your sister." Grace looks at him for a long moment, searching his eyes for any trace of manipulation, but all she sees is sincere love and deep regret. "Okay," she finally whispers, But this doesn't mean I've forgiven you. I know, Alexander says, and I don't expect you to. Emma's treatment is a complete success. Within weeks her condition improves dramatically, and doctors express optimism about her long-term recovery. Grace spends every free moment with her sister, but Rebecca notices something has changed in her. Grace, she says one afternoon, can I talk to you? Of course, Rebecca. I've been watching you these past weeks. I know you're grateful for Emma's recovery, but I also see you're struggling with something else. Grace sighs deeply. It's complicated. Does it have to do with Mr. Sterling? Everything has to do with him, Grace admits. I'm furious about the lie. But I also can't deny that the changes he's made in the hospital have helped hundreds of families. Mr. Harold now receives the diabetes treatment he needed. Sarah finally got her leg surgery. The children in pediatrics have new toys and books. It sounds like you're seeing a man who has learned from his mistakes. Rebecca observes gently. But how can I trust someone who lied to me from the first day? Grace, can I tell you something personal? Grace nods. My husband lied to me about something very important when we met. He told me he didn't have children because he thought that would drive me away. When I finally met his 5-year-old son, I felt betrayed and furious. What did you do? I almost left him, but then I realized the lie didn't define who he really was. He was a good man who had made a mistake out of fear. We've been married for 15 years now. Grace meditates on these words for days. She observes how Alexander has transformed not only the hospital, but his complete approach to business. He has implemented medical assistance programs in all his hospitals, increased salaries for all nursing staff, and established an emergency fund for employees facing family crises. But what impacts her most is a conversation she accidentally overhears between Alexander and James Mitchell. Mr. Sterling, James says, investors are concerned about all these additional expenses. Profit margins have decreased significantly. James Alexander responds, for years I focused solely on maximizing profits. And for what? To accumulate money I don't even need. An extraordinary woman taught me that the true value of wealth is in how you use it to help others. If investors can't understand that, they can look for other opportunities. Is the extraordinary woman Grace Thompson? Yes. And even though she'll probably never forgive me, I'm going to continue living according to the lessons she taught me. Grace feels something move in her heart. That night, for the first time in weeks, she actively seeks out Alexander. She finds him in his office, working late reviewing proposals for new social programs. May I come in? She asks from the doorway. Alexander looks up surprised and hopeful.
Of course.
Grace sits across from his desk, noticing the plans for a new community clinic spread on the table. What is this? A project I've been working on, Alexander says cautiously. A free community clinic for your neighborhood, like the one you dreamed of opening. Why? Because even if you don't forgive me, the ideas you shared with me are still valuable. The community needs accessible medical care. Grace studies the plans in detail. They're exactly as she had imagined her clinic, modern but welcoming, with spaces for health education, prevention programs, and comprehensive care for families. Alexander, she finally says, can I ask you something? Anything. If we had never met, would you have made these changes anyway? Alexander considers the question carefully. Honestly, no. I was so focused on numbers and profits that I had lost sight of the real purpose of what I was doing. You gave me back my humanity, Grace. And if I told you I want to be part of these projects, not as your employee, but as your partner, Alexander's heart races. What are you saying? I'm saying I've seen the changes you've made, not just in the hospital but in yourself. I'm saying I believe that together we can do much more good than we could do separately. And us, Grace and Alexander. Grace gets up and walks to the window, looking at the city spread below. Alexander, what you did was wrong. You hurt me deeply. I know, he says, also getting up but keeping his distance. But I've also seen how you've changed. I've seen the man you really are beneath all that wealth and power. And And I've realized that the man I fell in love with in that hospital room was real. Maybe I didn't know your name or your bank account, but I knew your heart. Alexander feels he can't breathe. What are you saying? Grace turns to him. I'm saying I want to try, but with conditions. Whatever you want. First, no more lies. Never again. Never again. Alexander promises solemnly. Second, this isn't a fairy tale where the poor nurse marries the rich prince. I want to be your equal partner, with voice and vote in all decisions about social programs. Of course. Third, we're going to take it slow. Very slow. I have to learn to trust you again. All the time you need. Alexander says, cautiously approaching. And fourth, he asks when she doesn't continue. Grace smiles for the first time in weeks, a smile that illuminates the entire room. Fourth, when you inaugurate that community clinic, I want it to be called Emma Thompson Community Clinic, in honor of my sister. It's already decided, Alexander says, and finally gets close enough to take her hands. Grace, may I hug you? Instead of answering, she takes the final step toward him. When they embrace, both feel they have found something neither knew they were looking for, a second chance at love and a shared purpose that is bigger than both of them. 6 months later, the Emma Thompson Community Clinic opens its doors with a celebration that attracts hundreds of families from the neighborhood. Grace, as medical director, cuts the ceremonial ribbon while Alexander watches with pride from the side. Emma, completely recovered and back at university, is the master of ceremonies. My sister Grace always dreamed of a clinic that would serve our community with dignity and respect, she says into the microphone. Today that dream is reality, and it's proof that when good people unite with a common purpose, they can change the world. During the celebration, Grace and Alexander find a moment of quiet in the clinic's garden. Did you ever imagine we'd end up here? Alexander asks, taking Grace's hand. In that hospital room, when I thought you were a man without resources and without family, I never could have imagined this, she responds. But you know what? I think that was the most real version of you. Everything else, the money, the business, the power, those are just tools. The man I fell in love with was the one who had time to listen, who cared about other patients, who saw my value when no one else did. That man is still here, Alexander says. He just now has the resources to do something meaningful with what he learned. And I have a partner who understands that true success is measured in lives changed, not bank accounts. Grace responds. As the sun sets over the new clinic, with the sound of children playing in the recreation area, and families receiving quality medical care for the first time in years, Grace and Alexander know they have found something more valuable than money. They have found a love that transforms, a purpose that unifies, and a second chance they seize to create something beautiful. Their story began with a lie, but became the most beautiful truth of all, that real love, when combined with purpose and action, can change not just 2 lives but an entire community. This story reminds us that we all deserve a second chance, and that sometimes the best things in life come when we least expect them. If it moved you as much as it moved us, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will touch your heart. What do you think about the power of forgiveness and second chances? Tell us in the comments what impacted you most about Grace and Alexander's story.